congrats. You're being very sweet and nice. Thank you. It's a good compliment so far, isn't it? Hey, Deb, why do I have you in two boxes? One says Deb, one says Cosmic, because he's recording it. So he records it, and that's what then goes on YouTube. I think it's live as well on YouTube. So today we're talking about emotions. Please let me just go through the rules. Don't comment on everybody else. Hi, I changed my screen name, fet name, MDELAO, with a bit of a mouthful. It is. I'll go with Breezy because I don't know how to say that. Hello from Montreal. Hello and welcome. So the rules are really simple. Please don't comment on what somebody looks like. Please be dressed. No wanking, no masturbation. Yes, seriously, we've had, I think, at least 4 wankers in the last couple of years. We've been doing this for about, it must be 2 to 3 years now. That's mental, a couple of years. And so, and if you are a mental health professional and you want a certificate to say that you've done some kind of CPD, career professional development, please email me and I'll send it to you free of charge as well, because it counts as 2 hours of CPD, even though you're not paying for it. So you get that for free. So when I do that for all my workshops. So if you need some CPD certificates, let me know. Yeah, so please make sure you're dressed. Please make sure that you can, we don't let anyone speak. I'm really sorry. If you want to say anything, you need to write it down the side. It's not a Q&A session today. We're talking about emotions, and I try and read out everything that everybody says. So, you know, if you've got anything to say, just make sure that you write it down the side. So no comments on what people look like. Often people will comment on silly little things like, oh my God, you've got a puppy, or look, it's a cat. Those sort of things, really don't mind. But let's try and stay on topic as well. I really wanted to focus today, and Poppy and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, we exchanged a message, didn't we? One, to coordinate this, you know. I really want to focus on how we can talk about emotions within BDSM and within a power exchange context and within polyamory, rather than focusing on this is just about emotions, because actually, as I say, a couple of months ago there was already a workshop on emotions. So I really want to focus on what it means. And I think the times we're likely to have emotions in any of those things, and that is that if we feel really excited about meeting somebody, if we feel really excited about doing something new sexually, if we have regrets about doing something sexually and or play, when I say sexually, it might be that we get really fucked off, or we have jealousy, or we feel new relationship energy. And all of these are based on emotions. Let's say if we're doing any form of polyamory. And it might be that we're really fucked off if we're doing power exchange, because actually that cunt's told us to do something again and we really don't want to. And as much as we love them and we're obeying, we're like, yes, wonderful sir or daddy or master, under our breath, and going, fuck off, you twat. Those sort of things do happen. So we just have to be aware of them, and they're all very emotion based. Or it might be that, oh, I don't want to tell you what to do anymore. I'm fed up with it. I'm fed up with your bitching. You always moan about stuff. You're not really a submissive. If you're a brat, it isn't under your breath like Zoe. So, you know, it varies, doesn't it? So I just think if we can understand emotions and work out some ways to work with them and feelings, that it can help us be different in our submission. So what Poppy and I are going to do today is talk about the difference between emotions and feelings, look at emotions, and teach some techniques as well that help you deal with emotions in a more effective way. Poppy, do you want to say anything?
No, I think obviously what you were saying, I just listened to you and go, what she said. But ultimately, I think it is about tools. And one of the things that I looked at very, very briefly was about some of the tools that we're going to use and we're going to talk about today. And like you said, how we apply them in terms of a relationship that might have a dynamic, how we look at that. So, we talk about perspective checks. We talk about, that's a really good way of managing how we're feeling. What does that look like in the context of a DS relationship? Are there certain people who are approved to be your go-tos? How does that fit in with the relationship? If you are looking at, self-love and self-care, I've been in relationships before where there's been pocket money attributed to that. These are kind of activities that are acceptable to do. These are the things that you like to do. We make a joke that ultimately, I love the spa day. If I'm struggling, that will be my go-to. However, that is my go-to because also it is a preference of the person that I'm in a relationship with. Quite often I quite like to go to Cheshire Oaks. I won't go to Cheshire Oaks, I will defer, because that is something that I enjoy to do and somebody else likes it. So how do we adapt, I guess, this list of our go-to coping around and fit it around the DS relationship? And I think that's really interesting, because you said we've done a lot of kind of workshops that focus on why we have emotions, what are our emotions, the wheel of emotion, all of that kind of stuff. How do we make it a little bit more kind of fitting for what we're talking about today?
Yeah, for sure. And also managing, you know, because I think power exchange is really interesting. Polyamory is really interesting. Kink, they're my life, aren't they? So of course they're really interesting, and they are interesting. It's difficult though when you have like a power exchange relationship and maybe one of you has mental health issues, or you have a power exchange relationship and one of you is really struggling with something emotionally, or something awful happens. Like, how can you be a wonderful slave if your mum's just died? How do I manage to be this perfect dom if my child is really in hospital and really struggling and everyone is vying for our attention? And it's how do you work out what person has the greatest need? I wrote a piece yesterday or the day before about why am I enough in polyamory, and it's who do you go to who have the greatest need? And somebody who has 4 daughters, you have to really emotionally work that out. So let's just start with a real basic about what is the difference between emotions and feelings, because depending on what sort of psychology you look at, whether you look at science, there are lots of arguments about the differences in this, because CBT, not the sort of we do, but that is in cognitive behavioural therapy, not cock and ball torture, you know, I'm talking about different things here, looks at, oh no, thought starts and then this process and these feelings happen because of these thoughts, potentially. They focus on thoughts more. Whereas actually, if you look at the science of it and you look at what happens in somebody's body, emotions and feelings aren't the same thing at all, but we use those words interchangeably. So an emotion is sparked by the body. It's proper data that's telling you something that is a physiological response to something. And then feelings are altered or impacted by our mental conceptions, misconceptions, and ideas and thoughts that we have. So if we can develop emotional awareness, we can have more control over our feelings. And we'll do a little bit about the physiology and what that looks like. So they're 2 different things. They're connected. So your emotions are sensations in your body, and that's really important to remember. And some of those emotions can really take us back to who we were and where we were. It might be that your stomach's really churning and you feel a bit sick and your heart's beating fast. What could that mean? Well, it'll mean very many different things to different people. It might mean that you're excited. It might mean that you're scared. It might mean that you are cautious about something. It might mean that you're having a panic attack. It will mean many things. But the thing that gets to you on that is the fact that actually what we do with that is we predict our emotions, which we've spoken about before. So your mind labels it as this is what it is, rather than actually it might not be. So when we're feeling emotions, we need to relate to them physiologically and work out what they are. But then our feelings are then our mental thoughts that impact that, if that makes sense. So,
and then I think that prediction obviously then leads on to behaviour, and that's the issue. Not necessarily when we predict how we're going to feel, but how we will determine how we need to behave to manage that. And that's really interesting. And I think sometimes a really nice example of that is your hair. You know, I'm sorry to bring you into it, but I think sometimes it's nice to simplify it for people. And it's the whole, you know, how you feel about your hair always comes back to it's not growing because of chemo.
Yeah.
And that's it, isn't it? That's that correlation there, rather than, do you know what, you'll choose. You had short hair before you had chemo. Interesting.
Oh, yeah, but I chopped it off because I knew it was coming. But no, I've had really short hair before as well. But it is the correlation you make. You're 100% right. And what we've got to do is take emotions as raw data, and then the interpretation, when we do a bit of research, is the feeling. And it's just understanding that that isn't necessarily so. So if you can get in contact with what you're feeling as a mental story, a predictor, a pattern that you've got, you need to really understand what's the emotion, what happens here underneath. And before I've spoken about that, it's like an arrow. So the way Poppy just pointed out, my immediate response is, oh, God, it's not growing. And actually, that's not very good for me, and I need to stop doing that because it's pointless. The emotion is probably one of fear underneath of, am I okay? What does that mean? And it brings up other things. But I've said this before in the last one about emotions. It's like you're struck by a set of arrows. So if you do your back in for the first time, you don't know what's coming. So you've got like, fuck, my back, you've got pain. You've got no predictors because you've never done it before. You're like, oh God, I can't get up, I can't do anything. Let's say you relax and it's not as bad as you thought and it's okay and you know how to treat it and you get the right physio, it's overdone quite quickly. The next time you do your back in, you'll be like, oh, I've got this. If you do your back in and you don't handle it as well as you can, or you end up freezing really badly and things get stiffer, the second arrow that hits us is, well, now I can't go to the toilet, I'm on my hands and knees, this really hurts, I end up in bed. So the next time you feel your back go, instead of going, oh, my back's gone, that's just I need to stay here, this is just what's going to happen, you then go into, fuck, I won't be able to go to the loo, I won't be able to work, I won't be able to do anything. So use all those predictors and patterns. And what does that mean about polyamory, about kink and everything else as well? Well, we rely on that to play with people in kink. If you hold a knife up to somebody or you start doing something, we're looking for those predictive patterns. If somebody wants you to feel fear, they want to recreate those patterns. If you are insecure about who you are, or you're not happy about who you are, and you're going into polyamory, all your predictors, your feelings will say, I can't handle this. You might feel fear, but then you'll feel resentment and frustration and confusion and not good enough. Your self-esteem will take a knock because you're predicting something. You'll say, this person will leave me, this won't be okay. But we also need it in kink. It's really important. It helps us play with fear. What are your thoughts on that, Poppy?
No, I agree, but I think it's that flexibility as well, ultimately. I really like your example in terms of the arrows. And if ultimately we've been able to say, okay, I've had an experience where I've been fortunate enough to be okay, I've come out of this experience okay. Let's say you're in a position where you can access private physio. So you have a bad back and you manage that and you're back to work within a few days because you've got a GP who's prescribed you diazepam quite quickly and you've had 5 sessions of private physio. What happens is we get into that situation where next time we have a bad back, shit, the NHS has gone to fuck, we can't get an appointment with a GP, we can't get access to meds, and we've got no money in the bank to afford that physio. It's about the ability to that flexibility in terms of, will I be okay? So the emotions and the feelings, I think you're right, but how do we, I guess, intrinsically widen that a little bit? And that's where obviously we'll come into that skills, but I think that's where it's really important to be able to develop the widening and all, because some people get really fixed. I will only be okay if.
Yeah, this is my only answer. And that's part of the thing about predicting and patterns, isn't it? So we even do it, I'm only okay if I've got a partner. I really need to play, it's the only release I've got. I'm only okay if somebody is jealous or possessive over me. We put lots of things in there that create all sorts of issues around polyamorous relationships, around kink relationships, and around power exchange relationships as well. You are only a dom if you do this. You are only a sub if you do this. And as much as we say, well, you want to avoid people who say all subs should, and that actually we've all got that a little bit. I've got a list where I think subs should do certain things, haven't you? I've got a list where doms should do certain things. We've all got it. It depends how toxic it becomes and how dangerous it becomes.
And it's that reappraisal, isn't it? I mean, that's what we would call it. You call it that reappraisal. But you have to reappraise how my feelings and my emotions link to my behaviour. And is that serving me? Is that possible? Or is there another route and another way around that? And I think with some people, you just become entrenched and this is the only way that I can cope. Or this is the only way that I can feel. I've had a really, really stressful day, therefore the only way that I can feel is overwhelmed, and my answer to overwhelmed is to open the fridge, for example, and then you get stuck in those cycles as opposed to reappraising that all of the time.
I was saying to some clients today, we often have an emotion and it's coming up and we don't know what it is and we don't interpret it, we're not sure, but actually we bypass a feeling completely and we go into a behaviour like open the fridge, and then that enables us to have this feeling. So the emotion is here, we don't know what it is, we don't know how to interpret it. We misinterpret it almost by skipping out the really connecting and reappraising and getting in touch with what's going on viscerally in the body. One of my messengers here, I go to, I'm going to eat. I'm going to eat. I'm going to do something. And then maybe if that was sadness, we might feel very sad about the fact that we've eaten, or we might feel very angry if this was anger. And what we need to do is learn to understand our own bodies. Baby Girl Dreamer says, this very topic is what's been depressing. Everyone has different definitions, highly opinionated about what is right or wrong as a role. Yeah, I think we have to work out what's right for us, and then we have to learn to communicate that. Somebody wrote on one of the posts that I put on yesterday, because I was talking about not been good enough for polyamory. And their response was, yeah, but what if somebody, you know, is better than you at getting partners? That's not fair, was what they were saying. Again, part of what we're talking about today is we have to reassess what is fair. We have to look at what is realistic. Should that person then not attract people to stay with you if they're poly? Should they change their behavior to stay with you or the way they are? Or should you be responsible for how you are and try and work it out and do something about it whilst having respect and care from them as well? So everyone's working together. And I think...
you're nicer than me. You know, my reply to that is, why we're expecting fair?
Yeah.
Well, where did that come from? That perception, that belief that it will be fair.
Entitlement. And that is a serious problem, and that is a serious feeling that's causing a problem, I think, at the moment. And, you know, you should do this to me, this should happen. It's all a negotiation, it's a starting point, and that's all it is. Same with labels. So we have to connect. What are the emotions that my body's trying to tell me right now? And then what's the feeling associated with that body emotion? Where am I going with this? What does it mean to me? We can also have numbing of emotions, especially if we've had trauma, and trauma really has to come into kink. There are a high proportion of people who have experienced trauma who come into kink to try and undo it, to try and redo their trauma for lots and lots and lots and lots of reasons. And that can be really cool, and it can work somewhat. It can also be really dangerous and trigger and cause problems. Or it could be that we're numbed because we've had trauma. So the intensity of the play and the things that we do enable us to feel. You know, I often used to say around play, God, I really feel like this. But actually, the key there is in the first couple of words, God, I really feel. And that is the key. It doesn't matter what I'm feeling or what's happening. It really allows for intense emotions and intense connections. And one of the things we were saying a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that's really important around this is BDSM and power exchange, especially, and poly sometimes, promise a greater than relationship, greater than vanilla, greater than monogamy. And they're not true. That's not, just because I wrote a piece on poly yesterday doesn't mean I think poly is better than monogamy. I don't. I think you've got to do what's right for you. One isn't better than the other. They are simply different. If you have vanilla sex, it's not better than kinky sex. It's just different. And we really need to get that out of our heads. So we need to make sure we're not numb. We need to look at our sensations and what's happening. So how the fuck do we do that, and where do we feel emotions? I'm still going to go back, and I'm going to put a link for everyone here, because this is, so sometimes I have a few bits up to remind me what to say. I'm going to put a link for people so you can go to this. This is a piece of reference to an article, but it's also a reference to about emotional body maps, about where we feel things and what we do. And I think we have to be in tune with our body, especially if we want to experience pain, or we want to experience submission, or we want to experience dominance. You've got to be in touch with what you're feeling. Can you take that today? Does it matter if you can take it? If somebody really wants you to take it, what's your power exchange? What's your relationship? And we can look at things like the emotions wheel to help us work things out. But one of the main things we can do is really have a look at where we are feeling certain things. So there's quite a few experts who've looked at this in the last few years, and they looked at from 2014 and onwards, where do emotions sit in our body? And what that piece of information tells you, if you want to click on it or save it, whatever you want to do, is it's like a heat map, which says this is really cold, this is really hot, this is inactive. And different parts of our body have different activations or fizziness, I think I call it sometimes, about where we feel something. So if we're happy, it's kind of all over with a really big glow up here. If we're frightened, our hearts are going, our stomachs are churning. That's when we're feeling more, but it's quite similar to disgust. If we're feeling love, you know, we shine up and light up in our chest and in our crotch area, actually. But actually, if we're feeling contempt, hands have activation, but our crutches are quite cold, like nothing, switch off. It's about our heads and our necks. It's really worth having a look at. It's something I printed out years ago, so I could really look at it and think, where am I feeling this? What is it that I'm feeling? And actually, it's something I use for anybody who is autistic, especially children, and or for people who aren't in touch with their bodies. Like, where are you feeling fizzy? If we were to stop right now, what are you feeling where? Like, you know, that anticipation when you're bent over or waiting for something, or you're waiting for your partner to come home, or partners, or you don't have anyone, if you're really resentful, the anticipation of different things that we feel physiologically in our bodies. And emotions can be categorized into various things. So that's negative, positive. However, emotions also tell us whether we're ill. They're all about homeostasis, and they also inform us of cognition, which is what this article talks about. So very few emotions are just neutral. So it's all about understanding the impact that you have on your partner when you're playing in polyamory, and an awareness, because actually it can also lead to better play. If we know about our emotions, we can actually have better play, better connections, better power exchange, because we can play on them, we can manipulate them, we can twist them, and we can change them. Hence, we'll be looking at that and looking at a lot of different things that we can do. A lot of people say, I don't know how to describe this or what it is. So again, let's go back to that basic. And it's a really good thing we can say if we want our partner to share with us, or partners or different people that we're playing with, what are you feeling? That's too big a question sometimes for people. What we might say is, where are you feeling greater activity in your body? Where are you feeling fizzy, or where are you feeling very dead? What's happening? Where's numb? Where's really cold? Where's hot? And sometimes that can really help us work out what emotions somebody's actually feeling. And it's really important to share that. What do you think, Poppy, about, especially before play and with what's happening with people?
I agree. I mean, I think we've had this conversation before. I think you really like the body maps, and I tend to be more of a fan of the wheel of emotion. And I think it's worth saying I'm not as prepared as you, so I do not have a link that I prepared earlier. But I think wheel of emotion is really interesting because you have ones that are far more in depth than others, and I think it's nice to have a simplistic tool. But the one that I have, and I wish I had a way of sharing it, I'll try and share it afterwards, but it has our core emotions, and then it has that spins off into 10, and then each 10 spins off into 30. So it's a huge one. So they're not all equal. So if you're Googling wheel of emotion, try and find one that has as many kind of overarching things as you can. And for me, one of the things that I find is that a lot of people struggle with the body map because they're not necessarily able to feel. I think a lot of people have that real disconnect with their body when they're struggling with emotions. And we find that a lot in the scene. Personally, I think we find a lot of people who perhaps there's some issues with neurotypicality and they are struggling to describe necessarily how they're feeling. And then we have the opposite, where people have an abundance of feeling, an abundance of emotion, but in actual fact, they're not able to order them or to name them or to describe them, and let alone explore them. So I think for me, when you're in that kind of position, that's why I like the wheel of emotion, because it's a little bit more. So I think one size doesn't fit all, essentially, but it's about being able to recognise and to name this is how I'm feeling, and to be able to break it down. And then for some people, I think it's easier to say, okay, this is what it is. How do I feel that? How do I explore that? So I guess we're saying the same thing, but for some people, you need to put the cart before the horse, and for other people, the horse before the cart. And it's having that real understanding of how you best explore emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. And funny enough, people have already done it, but I was going to come on to the emotions wheel as well, and they have that up. So, because sometimes it can also be really good. I know as a therapist, probably does other people here who are therapists, sometimes you can really feel what somebody's feeling. They throw it at you. And we do that to our partners. It's leaking from our very core. We're like, fucking hell, you're really angry. But if we were to say that, they might not be in touch with the fact that they're angry. They might not be nowhere near that yet, because maybe they've got different emotions on top. And there are lots of terms and different things we can look at. That transactional analysis talks about racket feelings, for example, the feelings that cover other feelings. And that goes back to the cliches of gender, whereby a lot of women cry when they're sad, because when they're angry, because it's much more attractive as a little girl to be sad instead of angry, all those cliches. And a lot of little boys, and I'm just using these genders quite sarcastically right now, they get very angry instead of being sad because they're told it's not cool to cry. And is that still a problem? Yeah, fucking well it is. It really is. We still bring people up in that way, sadly. So it's really good sometimes if somebody says, oh gosh, there seems to be some kind of sadness here. And actually they might not be in touch with that. So maybe we need to say something like, you seem to be a little guilty about something, or is there something going on? So we need to name a lighter emotion, one that comes from the top of the wheel to go back. I can hear the sarcasm in your voice means you're actually really angry and mad about something. So we need to be able to focus on what's in for people, so we can help with that as well. And that makes a real difference.
Physical as well. So the physical emotional vulnerabilities are really important, and we miss that. So, we get very wrapped up in body maps and been in the job that we are. But I'm guilty of that for myself. So I will get really kind of lost in how am I feeling, why am I feeling that? And in actual fact, when I sit and I try and take a moment, and I'm not very good at mindfulness and being in the moment, but I do try. And I'll do that, and I'll be like, do you know what? It's running downstairs 2 minutes before the workshop is a fine example of that. Oh my God, I've got the workshop. When was the last time you waiting for a drink? Oh my God, it was hours ago. Run downstairs, get a drink. But I think that physical, emotional vulnerability is really important as well. We miss the basics. So in actual fact, are we tired? Are we ill? Are we sick? If I'm very, very emotional and I'm not okay today, in actual fact, tomorrow, am I going to realise I've got strep A? And I think that's really, really important as well. Are we doing that sense check in terms of how we are as humans? All of our needs.
It's a real responsibility, isn't it, as a dom or a sub or a switch or any of those, depending on who you are in that moment, to be in touch with how you are. Because if you're not and you're really hungry, you might faint after some playing. If you aren't aware that you feel ill, you might actually really come down with something after playing. If somebody says, I really want a serious conversation about our poly setup, let's have a kitchen table meeting, or let's do something along those lines, and you are in a bad place emotionally and you're not aware, those things aren't going to go well. So we need to be aware. And, a body scan is a really good thing to do every so often. I'm a big believer that every time you pick up your phone, do a quick body scan. Actually, how am I? From my toes right the way through to my fingers, all the way up to the hair on the top of my head. What's going on? Do I need a pee? What's aching? What's happening? Have I got a sore throat? Is it emotional? Just to scan in and work out what's happening, because it's also part of our responsibility when we're about to play. Am I in the mood for this? Do I want to do this? How often we can get into a mood, it can really help. It's easy to experience lust and new relationship energy up front when we've got those things going on. Kara says, given how often I pick up my phone, that would be a lot of body scans. But it's a good thing, there's nothing wrong with that, is there? Because like Poppy just said, she's just like, fucking, I'm really hungry and I'm really thirsty. If she'd have done 10, she wouldn't have, because we can make them very, very fast. We can get really effective at them. I really need to pee. I really need, actually, I'm quite hungry. Or, I'm a bit hot, I'm having a bit of a flush. Or, I'm freezing cold, I don't feel well. Or, oh God, I ache. I've been to the dentist today and I can feel my whole mouth quite sore around here. And he made me laugh because I needed a filling. Fucking 200 quid for a filling. Fuck me. So I have a filling, and then he turns around and he said, let's take that crown out and start that one as well. I mean, that's like 800 quid. I'm like, no, let's leave it for a week, because I'm not only that, but I'm talking tonight. And if you do that side and that side, I'm going to be like, but most of the time I don't want to. So again, it's awareness, isn't it? No, I don't want to do that. I'll do that in a couple of weeks. When I don't have a workshop, I'm not worried, because you're going to rip something out of my mouth, take an impression. I'm going to be there for an hour and you're going to have to numb everything. Fuck that. No, thank you.
And I think sharing that awareness as well, because a body scan, all the things that we're talking about lots of internal work. And I think ultimately, the key to this is we're sharing it. We're talking about what this looks like in the context of a relationship. And I mean, how many people have had that opener of, well, what can you take? I mean, what can you take? Well, it depends how tired I am. Depends how hungry I am. It depends on how many weeks it is until the anniversary that I find really difficult, that I'm grieving. Like, that's a ridiculous thing. So for me, I always challenge that. I always challenge things like that to say, do you know what? Obviously, I'm responsible for doing a body scan, but you're responsible for recognising that that's not a realistic question. What can I take? When?
How long is a piece of string as well? Because different people want to give different things for different reasons, don't they? So it might be the medication you're on, it might be some drugs that you've taken, it might be lots of things. I think being asked that question is just a lazy top question. It's really lazy. Really lazy. It doesn't allow for any form of communication.
Anybody who asks me that question gets a lecture on, physical, emotional vulnerabilities. Give me a checklist and I'll tell you how many ticks today, and then I'll tell you how many cane strokes I can take in relation to how many ticks are on that box. Like, I genuinely think there should be a list. But anyway, that's
no play for you tonight.
So
and Cinders says, seriously, dentists always do that. You go in for one thing, they want to whip out 5 teeth, and then no one questions asked. Very much dentists I've met over the years are aware of how their patients may be feeling. But that's why I said no. He said, well, let's do that. And I said, no. And he said, oh, no, but it's easier. I said, no. And it's interesting because we talk about consent, don't we? My predictors came in of this is a bit sore. I've already taken some paracetamol. If I do that side as well, that's both. I'm not doing that. And somebody just wrote to me privately and said, last, the number of times I've said to a man, if you are truly interested in me, you should listen to the theory of Deb. For at least one time. It is fun for you to make me not the only whatever the heck it is I am. Thanks, Deb. You're really welcome. It's really difficult, isn't it? We do have to think about these things. Oh, God, my favourite expression when I'm with someone for anything, this young man was trying to tell me how much I would have a great time if I was riding his cock, because I'd be teaching him everything. And I was just like, I wouldn't. And my favourite expression is what's in it for me. I want to please. My pleasing comes from how I feel about somebody, actually, and my emotions. I'm much more demi-submissive than I ever used to be. I just used to do it for the physicality of it. That doesn't work for me anymore. So again, being aware of your feelings is really important. However, once you're aware of your feelings, you have to look at how do I work with regulating that. So a lot of therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists talk about emotional regulation and emotion dysregulation. So it's quite intense and it's quite difficult when we can't regulate how we're feeling and what we're doing, because our emotions then drive our feelings, that drives our behavior. And when we're not feeling okay, we try to either get our emotions validated or we try and get our emotions to go. And then we become more and more destructive because we don't know how to deal or how to ride that wave. And we talk about that within dialectical behavioral therapy. And we talk about being able to ride that emotional wave. Now, for some of us, that actually might be play. For some of us, it might be multiple love. And we say that that's a positive way of doing it. My point over lockdown is it isn't always a positive way of doing it if we use BDSM and play, because we can't always get it. And it might not always be a good way to do it if we need lots of new relationship energy, if we're not meeting lots of new people. We have to learn how to do these things for ourselves. So we suffer from emotional distress. There is a reaction to that. And we can make choices. There's judgment. So we make assumptions. We go into feeling. We interpret. We might look through other people's eyes, but we can notice our feelings, have sensations. So we can look outside and inside, which is the wheel and the body map principle. And there are lots and lots of other things that we can use. And then we have to start making choices. What does that mean? How are we going to respond to that? Well, if we go into a judgment place, we probably need to do some self-regulation in some way, shape or form we can shut down. If we go into a mindful place of this is where I am, this is how I'm feeling, and this is what's happening, we're more likely to go into emotional regulation. And because emotions come and go just like waves, that's why the emotional wave is a really important image. It's something you can look up. Somebody will probably look it up and put it on there now for you, because that's what people do. It's learning to ride that wave, because it will go fairly quickly, but not as quickly as we want it to. It takes at least 20 minutes for an intense emotion to pass and go through, because a lot of us just keep choking it down and swallowing it. You know, when you're playing and you feel really overwhelmed, whether you're a top or a bottom, and you're like, God, I could just cry here, or this is a lot. And sometimes it's really cathartic to cry. It's really helpful when we're aware, but we need to be aware of why we're crying. If it's too much pain, then maybe we need to stop. Or actually, if it's too much pain, maybe we want to take it for somebody. As a top, we need to check in and say, can I ask why you're crying? What's going on for you? That can fucking ruin a moment as well, can't it? So we need rules around this stuff. We need to be able to talk about it beforehand to see how we're going to play and what we're going to do. I'm not sure why we seek validation in that moment, especially if we don't know what we're feeling, but I noticed it happens. What is validation? What are we looking for when we feel that way? We would like somebody else to notice us and tell us it's okay. A lot of people come into therapy and really what they're looking for is permission. It's okay for you to feel that way. That's really normal. That's really regular. That's what a lot of people suffer from. It's okay. You're okay. A lot of people don't know how to do this. They've been given really bad examples by their parents, by family, by different people, and they haven't learned how. They really haven't learned how. I've got a client at the moment, and by the way, if I talk about people, I have permission to talk about people. I have consent. I do not do it without their consent. And I've got he's a boy. He's 18, but you know, he is a boy. He's very, very young. He's been a selective mute since the age of 14, and I see him, and it's really difficult. Selective mutism mixed with autism. Can't handle any emotion in any way, shape or form. He hasn't made a noise in 4 years. Not one, not a peep, not a noise, whether he's hurt, whether he's laughing, anything, because he cannot deal with what he's feeling. And actually, what's interesting is a lot of people have just put the autistic label on him and said that's why. I've taken this to supervision as well. That's wrong. It is wrong. There is, and there are elements of autism. However, what he's got is PTSD, severe PTSD from severe bullying. And he needs love and compassion to be able to help with that. So he needs to understand how he feels. So at the moment, we're just doing a lot of learning. So, and a lot of that thing. So some people talk about primary and secondary emotions, but really what they're talking about there is the feeling that comes from the emotion. So again, that's really confusing language that people use. Anger might be a primary emotion, shame might be the secondary. And that's then the feeling that we have because it's down to the interpretation and the patterns that we have. And there is such a good TED talk. I've forgotten her name, actually. I'll try and find it in a minute. Angela something, I think it is. And she talks about predictors and patterns in emotions. I've not met an autistic person without CPTSD yet. I wouldn't disagree with you, to be honest. I wouldn't disagree with you. However, the argument is, did the autism and our inability to communicate, read and do those different things lead to PTSD? Because it can lead to bullying, it can lead to not being able to communicate, it leads to lots of things. So it's chicken and egg. That's the question, which came first. And there are lots of myths about emotions, aren't there? You know, oh, emotions are just so stupid. Or like, I love the latest one in all the songs, you can catch feelings. Don't think you can. It's not a virus, but that's a really trendy thing. That's what people say and do all the time. There are always myths, or that this particular emotion is weak, vulnerability is weak, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. And again, it comes into those shoulds around these sorts of things, especially around BDSM, kink, any form, polyamory, power exchange.
Yeah, like they're quantifiable.
Yeah. Completely. Zoe doesn't want to catch feelings. No. So just stay by yourself in a room forever and you'll still catch some feelings because you'll really hate it. Eventually. Or something will go wrong. Or you'll
catch lonely and you'll catch regret. That's what you'll catch.
Yeah. Or you'll catch frustration as you're going through, like, fucking hell, why isn't something in my cunt right now? You know, like we just get lots and lots of different feelings. Well, that'll do. That's a large insertable object. I'll have that, or I'll do this and I'll do that. But they still bring up emotions. Nice Kitty says, in my opinion, you can catch feelings. That fella at work who is so sweet and sharpens my knife, hairy arms, I find myself catching feelings. You don't. You don't just have catching feelings. What you are is you are experiencing an emotion, which is a physiological response in return to that person, their body, their smell, the way they are with you, their kindness, their sexiness, or whatever. And then you have feelings because there are interpretations on top of that of what that should look like and of what it's been in your past. And we can also have lots of labels around that when it comes to things like attachment and other things as well. I'll catch feelings for insertables. What will you do when it breaks? What will you do if it needs new batteries? What will you do if it starts to disintegrate? You know, like when your toys break or whatever, like it's a lot of desperation there at times. If your favourite whip breaks or something along those lines, that's really something to think about as well. Okay, so how do we start to look at this? What are some tools? Isn't empathy a sort of catching feelings though? No, Karis, I'm going to disagree with that. The only thing you can catch, no, it's not, Angela Adrens. I'll try and find it in a minute if Poppy's talking in a minute or whatever, but it's a TED talk and it talks about emotions, predictors and patterns. I'll find it in a minute. I'll put it up for you so you can have a look at it because it's really good. I really like it. It's not Angela, for fuck's sake. It's Lisa Feldman Barrett. That's who it is because I do know because I just come back into my brain. It's Lisa Feldman Barrett's talk on You Aren't at the Mercy of Your Emotions. It's a brilliant TED talk. It's one I would recommend that you all have a read of, have a look at. It's not particularly long. You can have a look at the data down the side. So I'll find it for you and I'll give it to you in a link. So I think we have to be careful. No wonder I couldn't find it. Yeah, I'm so sorry, Cinders, because you're being so helpful. I really appreciate that. I've got it though, so let me just chuck that in there. There you go. Have a look at that. So what we've got to learn to do is manage our emotions and work out how we feel. And I disagree that actually that when we talk about empathy, oh, somebody sent it to me as well. Thank you very much. So I disagree with you. So empathy is an awareness of somebody else's feelings. It isn't a catch. It's an awareness. It's leaning in. The only feeling we can catch, according to research, is actually anxiety. So there is a piece of research done with tea bags, with sweat, and many other things. Don't want to go into it. I might laugh at that. I'm talking about squirty body fluids all the time. And then I say sweat and I go, bleh. So hopefully no BO, but makes me laugh. See, feelings come into that. Oh, BO makes me, it's a visceral reaction for me, BO. It's like, oh, God, put some antiperspirant on. So we really have to think about that. So when they did this piece of research is when they put the sweat of anxious people in a room, in a hot room, so it's quite sauna-like, and they did it with angry, happy, scared, contempt, disgust, and surprise, all the core emotions that we're born with. And what they found was the only one that other people pick up on is anxiety. Now, do I think we can feel other people's feelings? We can, but the awareness is that it's not ours. As a kid, that's a skill that I developed. It's really handy as a therapist now. I'm really aware sometimes of what other people are feeling and why, and I've been called a white witch and all sorts, which is great. It's really helpful, but again, you could go too fast. Just because you know somebody else's feelings doesn't mean that they're ready to know what they're feeling, and it doesn't mean that it's appropriate for you to say. And we have to be aware of that in BDSM as well, and in power exchange. You might be aware and saying, oh, baby, you look really sad. No, I'm fine. And then we get an interesting response to people. So I don't think we catch other people's feelings. I think we can be aware of them, and we have a template within ourselves to say, oh, that person's sad, but also we can get that wrong. We can interpret feelings, if you look at a lot of the research, from faces and micro expressions. And that's quite interesting. There's lots of little apps you can get to do that.
I think anger's interesting. I agree with what you said about anxiety. I think anger's an interesting one as well, though. When you look at there's lots of studies, and I can't remember them because I'm rubbish, but ultimately that have been done in prison settings around anger. So anger is the one that we are most likely to transfer onto other people. So if you're around somebody who's very, very angry, the impact on that, whereas you will talk about catching, you kind of transfer anger in a way that's very different to happiness. So that's why in prisons they do a lot of that skill of opposites. I'm sure we'll talk about opposites in soon. So obviously putting a limit on how you feel your feelings, feel them for now, and then do something the opposite. So this is why there's all these wonderful YouTube videos of loads and loads of prisoners doing, I don't know, ridiculous dances to Michael Jackson and things like that, because it's about trying to manage that transference of having lots of angry men together. We can be quite dangerous. So I think so anger management's slightly different than anxiety, and then all the other emotions. But I don't think empathy is an emotion in that sense.
And that, you also know male prisons, as we all know, and you know that the warrior gene comes into that as well. It's really interesting when we start to look at the genetics of that as well, because there are a few women, I'm still going to go with women and men just for now for this research, sorry, because I really understand that it leaves some people out. I totally get that, and this is about this research that's been done. And that a lot of men are born with a warrior gene, which makes them much more likely to be violent or aggressive and pick up on that anger, whereas only a few women have it, if any at all. Like, it's such a small percentage, it's negligible, and that's interesting as well. So what are these feelings, and how are they genetically within us, and are they epigenetic as well? Really boring, it's a word I use a lot. So what sort of experiences are passed down over the years to us? Because a lot of time when we feel anxious or stressed, it might not even be your shit. It's your great-great-great-grandmother's, or it's your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfathers. It's the shit that they experience. It's the shit that they went through that actually changes the way you read your DNA. And that's incredible, because sometimes our shit isn't even our own, and that's mad.
And I think that's really interesting when we talk about autism and complex PTSD, because I have perhaps worked with people who I would say they have difficulties with autism, and they're very, very young. So they don't necessarily have all the classic symptoms of CPTSD, but anything like that has a huge hereditary component. I think when you look at that from an epigenetic point of view, it starts making far more sense. And I think that's really interesting as well.
Baby Girl Dreamer said, I've been asked often what exactly my attachment to my dom is if we are not romantic. I'm not in love with him, but I guess I like him. that's the best I can put it. It's hard to label our feelings. Well, actually, relationships don't have to have feelings. A lot of play relationships don't have feelings. It might be that they have a feeling of trust. It might be that we get certain chemicals from it. It might be that we really like being with someone and we like being told what to do by them. We don't have to have feelings to have sex or to have play or to engage in power exchange. A lot of people will argue to be romantically involved with somebody, of course we have to have feelings. And for some of us, we might want feelings to be sexual. But again, not everybody does. So what's your attachment to your dom is, he's my dom. That's your answer. That's it. That's my attachment to my dom. If they're asking you what our attachment style is, that's a completely different question. And it might be, well, my attachment style hasn't got a lot to do with this relationship. And if you looked at it from the outside, you might see it as anxious or avoidant because there aren't feelings involved. But there aren't always in power exchange relationships, and there aren't always in BDSM relationships. They are a negotiation, they're a quid pro quo, they're a swap of certain things, like friends with benefits can be. That's a friendship. It's not necessarily about attachment styles. Or if we're demi and we really feel that pull to somebody that needs to be emotional, that's different. So when someone's trying to find out your attachment style, doesn't always mean that that's the attachment you've got to somebody, especially in play relationships. If you have feelings for someone and you have a certain attachment style, that might come into it, and it's completely different. And I find that fascinating because I think they're very different things.
Yeah, the more pertinent question there is, what need are we fulfilling for one another? That's one, isn't it?
For sure. And it's just so interesting that we assume that there's particularly a romantic, a lot of people, I personally don't want to do play without sex, and I don't want to do play and sex without some feelings. So for me, my connections are much more romantic or demi, whereas actually Poppy, you'll play, won't you? Without feelings, you'll do something different. You might need to like someone, but you it's a different form of relationship there.
Yeah, I really like sadistic play if there's no connection. Other kind of sexual play, absolutely not. I can't do sexual play without feelings, but BDSM, sadism and masochism, absolutely. And that's it. And it ultimately goes down to that transfer of need, and that's why it's so important to recognise what our needs are. So many people aren't able to do that. What is the need and how do we fulfill it?
And it's really important, because the problem is with power exchange, kink and BDSM is we have these incredible expectations of what it's about to give us. Then we turn and say, like I said, because Poppy and I were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, this idea of foreverness, your mind, blaming, ownership, it promises something that actually maybe the other person can't always keep up. However, it isn't a question of if something goes wrong, it's a question of when. And that's one of my favorite expressions. Your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts will get in the way in some way of your relationship with yourself or other people at some time. Now, if you are in an abusive relationship or you have problems with yourself or with others, but we're not talking about that. And we will come on to that in a minute. But we need to talk about how we feel. We need to share. However, we can also overdo it. I see some couples sometimes, and I just say, would you just fucking stop talking about your shit and just bring it to therapy? Because it's all you do. It's so detrimental. I think we need to talk about that. Let's talk about our feelings. Let's have another conversation about our feelings. I don't care that it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Let's talk again. I feel like Michael McIntyre like that. But it just becomes mad, doesn't it? It's like, no, I think we both need to go to sleep, and shall we just have a good time? How about you fuck me or I fuck you? How about I stick my little finger up your arse and see how it goes, or down your urethra? Let's live dangerously. Let's do something else instead, or let's go to the pictures, or let's do something fun, rather than let's not keep talking about everything, because talking without comprehension and action means fuck all. Especially in kink and BDSM. So you've got to talk, but you've also got to comprehend. You've got to process what you're feeling and what's going on. You've got to be really honest, which means you've got to know yourself, and you've got to really use I statements and say, me, I, this is how I am, rather than you do this and you do that. We've got to be careful, especially with BDSM and kink and our exchange, not to stonewall somebody else, not to make excuses or reasons or pull away. We need to be really honest and truthful about what's happening. I don't like it when that happens. I feel really alone, rather than you make me feel like a piece of shit. But that takes a skill, and those skills are quite difficult to get. And if we do need space from anyone or each other, we need to really make sure that we say, I just need 20 minutes, I'll be back in 20, we can talk about it, or please can we talk about this tomorrow at 10? So we're not stonewalling and disappearing, and that doesn't help. So you are going to not have good power exchange. You're going to have shit kinky sex sometimes. You're going to have shit kinky play sometimes, and you're not going to get on. And even if you have got to, even if you're not a brat, even in therapy, I remember calling one of my therapists a fucking witch once. Does that matter? Is that right? Is that wrong? It's really good. If I can be really honest, you're a fucking witch. That came out of my mouth. That's really good in therapy because that gives us something to work with. So we are going to have our feelings and our emotions in kink, in BDSM, in power exchange. You cannot avoid it, and you will damage the relationship if you do. It then becomes what you're going to do about it. It doesn't make you any less the human. It doesn't make you any less dominant or submissive or pulley. It makes you a better human. With the talking come expectations. That between talk and action is often a huge difference, needs to be communicated, especially when someone goes into your mind creating fantasies. Yeah, I've got a writing on expectations, and I think expectations are one of our worst enemies that we can have, because we create a fantasy in our head about what it should look like, and that's one of the problems with BDSM, was mentioned earlier.
It's all of the oughts, isn't it? It ought to be like this. It's not like that. What does it mean? And ultimately, I think sometimes it's about viewing negative emotions as the opportunity to practice these skills, to develop resilience, to be able to think, okay, how are we going to work it out? Let's do a break of contact, all that kind of stuff, rather than we ought to just talk about all of our problems, like you say, that anxious kind of, let's have a conversation about how we feel. You know, we ought to be talking about how we feel all of the time. Well, no, you ought to just be sleeping or doing something that you enjoy with one another or putting it to one side. You know, we ought to always be feeling the good feels. Well, no, you're not. You're going to feel shit, and that's okay. And it's about that perception of, this is my opportunity too. You know, whenever I had a really, really, really shitty day, I come home and I'm like, oh, well, that's an opportunity to build a bit of resilience. You know, and it kind of becomes quite flippant, but it matters, you know.
Well, I think you have to be. We'll talk about some skills, because we'll do a whole hour of different skills and different things that we'll come into about distress tolerance and different things that you can do. I'm going to talk to you about research from Stanford. I'm going to talk about DBT. Poppy's going to as well. We're going to look at some of these things. And what we have to look at when we expect is, well, you're your own fucking worst enemy and your own setup there. I have to take responsibility for my expectations, my feelings. I think we get boundaries really, really wrong. There are things that we don't want to happen, and there are things we don't like happening. That's not boundaries. That's negotiation. That's situational. That's shit that happens. Actually, boundaries are for, no, this is dangerous. This is not okay. But we use the word boundaries. So my boundary is, you've got to call me before 4 o'clock. And my other boundary is, you've got to make sure that you think of me and buy me this when you're shopping. And my other boundary is, no, that's a preference. That's something I would like. That's an as well as. A boundary is about your fucking safety, your okayness. Your expectations around other things are, a boundary is only as good as what you are willing to see through. As Leather Lioness says, boundaries are in your control. Somebody texted me, I was on field, and somebody texted me the other day, and they said, I'd really like to date you. And I said, well, let's meet. And we had a few conversations, getting on quite well. And he said, we'll meet on Sunday. I said, cool. One of my expectations, it's not a boundary, is that I feel very strongly that we need some communication. I don't like it when somebody disappears and then on the day they say, what time are we meeting? That's not my style. It's not the way I do it. So please, could we have conversations a little bit? And can we not just have conversations about sex? That's not something I'm into either. And in fact, if that goes on for too long, that does become a boundary. I'm out. Doesn't talk to me for 24, 48 hours. And I'm like, interesting. So clearly not listening to me. That's a red flag. So this person is showing me who they are immediately. 48 hours. Okay. And then says, oh, by the way, I forgot to ask, do you do rimming? Fucking hell, left field or what? Are you serious? Do you do rimming? Like, do you remember what I said? I was really clear about not just being sexual and talking. Oh, yes, sorry. Have you had a nice day? Yes, thank you. Have you? So, yeah, but do you do rimming? Okay. And we talked a little bit about rimming. The truth is, I do, as long as you've had a fucking shower, and you aren't a dirty twat. So yes, I might be interested in that. And then we got on to like the next 48 hours, he didn't talk to me again. I didn't give him another opportunity. I just blocked him immediately on everything I'd ever spoken to. I'm not interested. And that's where a boundary then comes in, because I feel really strongly about that. I don't want that to happen. They're giving me something, a message that I can then read, and it's stirring up my feelings. And my emotions are anger and sadness. That the feeling is disappointment, and here we go again. It's that. So we just need to be aware of that. So Harris said, AFOG, another fucking opportunity for growth. Yeah. Tit Sub said as well, agree about the skill to communicate clearly needing to be learned. The reflections since my dynamic ended have made me realise there was a fair bit going on I wasn't happy with. And that's why we need to sit down and be aware of what we are feeling. It is not another person's responsibility to guess or to tell you. It is ours to be aware of and work out how we want to communicate that. And it's ours to be aware of and say, how do I do this? And then if you say, I can't, well, then you need to meet someone who can help you with that. And that can be therapy, that can be group stuff, that can be self-help books, it can be all sorts of things. It's really important that we do that. Zoe says, I've learned a lot about boundaries because of you and Poppy. Oh, thank you. And I've held them throughout kink into the vanilla world. And it's actually meant vanilla friends have fallen out with me. Oh, absolutely. Because they can't walk over me anymore. I've leveled up in the friend pool. I really agree with that, and I appreciate that and see that, because when we turn around and we say, right, I want to learn how to hold a boundary, you've got to be aware of the consequence. And a lot of the time what that consequence is that you will lose people because they want you to behave in a certain way. And that's when we start talking about the Fisher-Price family toy box you've got a cube that goes in a square, you've got a sphere that goes in a circle, you've got all these different shapes. And families and friends are like systems. So we start talking about systemic therapy, and everyone has their place, and that's where they're supposed to fit. So when you change your shape, someone picks up that fucking hammer and they're trying to make you back in. This is what a submissive does. This is what a friend does. This is what you do. And actually, no, I don't. If that's what a submissive does, then I'm not your average submissive. I'm not your normal submissive. How would you like to meet me in my submission? And that's completely different, and that can feel better. What do you think, Poppy?
I agree. I mean, I think ultimately you just got to look at the statistic of relationships that break down after weight loss surgery. And essentially, it's high. I can't remember, but it's certainly in the 70%, I think. It's well over the average of 40 to 50. And ultimately it is. It's about that change, isn't it? My relationship, my connection, my attachment with you was built upon this, and ultimately that's all changed, that's all shifted. So when we do learn to, implement boundaries, we lose people. And there has to be an acceptance of this is probably going to happen, like when we make the decision to enter into anything. But I guess it's about the understanding of, that's why I'm using the weight loss as an example, but that's before you go into that process, you really do get, if you're fortunate, but you get the work in terms of this is what the consequence of this might be. And I think ultimately whenever we go into therapy, or whenever we look at boundaries, or whenever we look at leveling up in terms of our emotional well-being, we really do have to think, okay, what will the cost of this be? This will be the benefit, the pros and cons, the cost benefit analysis will be this. However, the reality is I am probably going to lose people. And I think, I don't necessarily think we do enough of that in our contracting work. Actually, I think it's interesting. Some people are really good at that, and some people aren't.
It's one of my favourite things to talk about. Everyone gets really bored of me saying it because it's pre-morteming. It's work out what's going to hit you, work out what's going to happen, and look at the goods and the bads and have an answer for lots of them. It's really important. Cinder says, I've experienced that too, Zoe, because I've asserted and protected my boundaries since the pandemic. A lot of people have not liked it. No, they won't. But you will find people who really like you for you. I really respect boundaries, and I prefer to have friends who have them, because it means I can have them too. Their yes and no allows my yes and no, rather than us walking all over each other, which is a lot better. Zoe says, hugs. I can't say I miss any of those friends. I hope you don't too. Lisa, you've asked, where does fear fall into these emotions? Feeling. Fear of the outcome of the conversation. Okay, so that went from an emotion into a feeling, predicting what it might end up, I should say. So fear is a core emotion. It's a really sensible emotion to have. It tells you when you are in danger, and it informs you of something that says I need to act or do something differently. Can we always control those responses? The answer is no. We might go into a fight, flight, freeze, friend, fuck, flop, foe, fawn. We're not there. And we might respond without even realizing we're responding. And this is where a very old part of our brain comes in, the limbic system, fear, the amygdala, the way we experience fear. We tend to have a response to that we don't always have a lot of control over. But what you then said was fear of the outcome of the conversation, which is now turned into a feeling because that's a pattern and a predictor. So I'm scared for you is connected. I don't know you, Lisa. I don't know you, so I'm making huge assumptions here and tell me to go fuck myself if I'm wrong, because that's fine as well. And it sounds like that predictor then becomes when I have conversations, things don't go very well, or maybe something happens and I'm really frightened of the outcome because that's the pattern. I can't control what's about to happen. I feel out of control. I feel vulnerable. How do I make this okay? Which is the feeling. And actually that then gets in the way of the conversation because our predictor's telling us how it's going to be. And one little thing I used there that I made up years ago was the lottery tool. And that is that it's really interesting that you, like if you have 10 grand in the bank or 10p in the bank or 10 pounds in the bank, it doesn't matter what you've got. But if you take all of it and you put it on the lottery and I told you to do that, you would tell me to go fuck myself eventually, because why would you do that? And why shouldn't you do that? Because you can't predict the future. But when it's negative, we all fucking can. They won't like me, they'll leave me, it won't work out, this relationship won't work. See, look, that's the way it is.
And I tell you what I really like doing with this as well. Sorry, Dad.
Go on.
But one thing that I really like doing in my work with when I'm in situations like this is, for example, so we'll use when I ask, I get told no, then I feel rejected. And I don't know if that's how it works for you, but that would be a very common one. And I think, going back to the wheel of emotion, it's really interesting. So if you were to look at that and you were to say, do you know what, I feel anxious, and then you go to the next step and it's about rejection. So rejection might be the outcome of this, and ultimately that's what you're frightened of. I think it can be helpful to have that visual tool, because then you can look at, well, what are all the other potential outcomes? So when you look at that, I wish I had the wheel from me. When you look at that, rejection is one of them, but ultimately there could be a myriad of different things that could come. So in actual fact, what I'm telling myself is, if I ask and I get a no, I'm going to feel a certain way. However, the reality is we might not get a no, but okay, I'm going to get a no. What else can I feel? And then it's about having, I guess, the agency to say, well, do you know what? I can influence how I feel. I can be told no, and I can take it as, oh, well, I feel really rejected. But in actual fact, I can feel these other things as well. I think that can be interesting. It's kind of more sophisticated way of doing opposites, but it's about using that as a visual aid to choose how you feel almost.
Yeah. So, and some of those on the wheel might be things like exposed, nervous, persecuted, excluded, worthless, inferior, irritated, worried, overwhelmed, frightened and helpless, because I have got it in front of me. I just brought it up while you were talking.
Yeah. So in actual fact, what are the potential other outcomes to this? And sometimes it's nice to just walk that journey, because in actual fact, like you say, when you're fearful, when you break it down, you're probably aware already when you do the work about what it is you're afraid that may happen. So what are the other alternatives?
If you look at what Cinder's then replied, what she was saying, sorry, I'm assuming gender their Cinder's what they were replying, I apologise. So that I don't really miss them. My dad and I have really fallen out. That's more to do with his reactions, so I leave that with him. I'm very mindful of what I carry, luggage. Lugging someone else's burdens is never a good thing. It isn't, and it does have a consequence. And that's what we're talking about here. Are we willing to pay the consequence of what we're about to do? Or do we make a choice to accept that actually when I do that, this person isn't happy, or I'm not happy, and I'm all right with that to this extent? We have to look at what cost and what does it mean. And Zoe wrote back, it's always hard with family. I hold boundaries with my mum and she respects them a lot better now. That's the other thing I'm going to say. There is a rough period. There is a rub up against period for some people some of the time, whereby we start to hold boundaries and people are like, oh, fuck off. But actually some of them, for when they feel very strongly, is they will come round because they'd rather be with you than not. And then people start to respect boundaries more when they know you're going to hold them, because it goes back to that classic phrase of what you allow will continue. And it does carry on that way. He still lives with mum, so small doses or I'd have no contact too. Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, with your brother as well? And he won't, because it doesn't matter as much to him, because especially if he's been treated in a certain way or is a little bit of a golden boy or any of those things, you know, like you're nodding, then that's what we go. Angel, you said that you ticked them all. Yeah, because it's based on fear. So there are 5 strategies that, and we're going to some DBT stuff as well that we can look at. So if you read anything, there's a psychologist and a researcher, and his name's James Gross. And when he talks about feelings, he talks about when you name what's wrong, you can tame what's wrong. That's what he says. I quite like that, name and tame. That can sit with us very well. He talks about situational selection. So, oh, absolutely, Debs, I'm okay with it, as my dad was ignoring all of my boundaries, and then he was surprised when I pulled him up on things. He said some really awful things lately in relation to my mental health, and that was the final straw for me. So things will always get worse, because they'll attack and they'll go for the thing that hurts you the most to make you feel emotional, which will make you respond because you have feelings, which will lead to a consequence of you giving in. That's what somebody wants. That's the next stage. That's what we do. So he is a golden boy and gives incel vibes. I've raised my concerns to Mum and she can't see it. So she can see it too. So understands why I don't maintain a relationship. That's very frightening. There's been some research recently into actually, you know, you've got a few people who are very powerful in that incel community and how much they're impacting schoolboys. And there's a surge recently of schoolboys who have incel behaviour, and that's a fear. So let's just go back to what James Gross said. So he talks about situation selection. So situation selection, when we're looking at it, means choosing situations. See you later. Bye. Ciao for now. So situational selection means choosing situations that might generate a different or a pleasant emotion. Can I choose a longer route home when it comes to traffic? Can I have a different conversation at a better time? How can I look at the situation that I'm in and choose something slightly different? Can't I? I just need to do this now. I know they're in a bad mood. You know, the plumbing's just broken. They're really shit. And you say, by the way, you still owe me 50 quid. They're probably going to take that fucking hammer and wrap it around your head because you've chosen the wrong situation. That's really important. He then talks about situation modification. So I'm already in a situation that isn't good. This situation is getting bad. It's getting worse. What else can I do? Do I agree to disagree? Do I walk away? Do I say, hey, can we sort this in 20 minutes? We're both in a really bad situation. We're both not very good here. So you've got the first one, situation selection. Have I chosen the right time in the right place in the right way? Situation modification. Can I change anything here? I'm realising I'm in a bad situation, and I get that we're already asking quite a lot because we need some distress tolerance, which is what we're going to go on to in a minute and cover those for the next 15 minutes. So when the conversation is getting heated, can I just say, this is getting heated, I'm going to go. This isn't okay, I'll be back in 10 minutes. I really care about you. I want this conversation. This isn't going to end well. Give me 20 minutes. Or so we need to make sure that we modify the situation that we're in. He then, I'll come back to that in 1 second. So he then talks about attentional deployment, diverting your attention. DBT talks about this as well. Change your mind, go a different way, go down the other fork, do something different. It might be like when you're in a situation where you are, this is sounding sophisticated for neurodiverse. It is sophisticated, and it's still, we're going to break it down to little exercises that we can really help. So, and this is really good for neurodiverse people as well, because actually they're really good at changing situations sometimes, and sometimes they're not. They can get very stuck. So it really varies, and all of these things can be used by neurotypical and neurodiverse. So that, how can I change? How can I change the situation? How do I put something else in my head? How do I have a distraction if I'm about to have a needle in my arm and I can't bear it? So maybe I choose not to look. Maybe I choose to put a very strong flavour in my mouth. Maybe I look through my phone and I listen to a piece of music that I really like. Maybe I do something else. So, and that's attentional deployment, which just means diversion. They're all fancy names. That's the problem with them. He also talks about cognitive reappraisal. And cognitive reappraisal means I need to change my perception of this situation. Again, how can we talk about these when it comes to BDSM and play and different things? Situational selection, choose the right time to play, choose the right circumstance to play. I remember running a workshop and this dominatrix was there with her partner, and she talked about how amazing she is, and she just, when she's got a temper, she takes it out on him and beats the shit out of him. I'm not sure I approve of that, and I don't think that's a good situation selection. He's a researcher. His name's James Gross, funnily enough, Gross. I'll try and find a link in a minute, and I'll put it up for you so you can have a look and a read. So if we're going to have a look at modification, if we've got, let's say we've got a dominant who's drunk, or we've got a sub who's drunk, and they're really insisting, how can we modify that situation? How can we say, hey, let's go for a quick walk? I really want to connect with you. What else can we do here? We can change something. It could be that sometimes one of the things we talk about when we are enduring pain, we're not getting a lot of pleasure of it, but we want to endure it. Attentional deployment is really good. So for me, sometimes when I really want to do better at pain, I shove my fingers in my ears, because it really works for me. When I can't hear it, I feel a lot better. So I sometimes do this, and I'm going, or I talk to myself or do something. And that is changing my attention for a different focus. It's not focusing on the hit, whereas other people will focus their attention completely into it. Cognitive reappraisal. Change your perception. How is this? I've lost my job. Now, this is the whole fucking bollocks about what an opportunity. Do you know what? I'm fed up with how many opportunities I get in life, and I'm sure you all are too at times. Oh, good. Another fucking opportunity to learn something. However, it's really important for us to survive life. My relationship has ended. So if I tit sub, actually, I'm going to, if you don't mind slightly, I remember you feeling really not so great quite a few months ago about what had happened and last time. And actually, but it sounds, what I'm hearing and what you're doing is you are doing cognitive reappraisal, which is actually, when I look back, it wasn't quite what I wanted it to be. So you're thinking about that differently in your head. I wouldn't want that same situation again. I still really want that person. I might still have feelings for them, but actually that wasn't great. And that is exactly what we're talking about here. And then once we've had the emotion come up and we're aware of how we respond to it, we need to modulate or change our response in some way, shape, or form. And if they're overwhelming, how do we get help? So if somebody makes a mistake, we might be really angry. We could actually make things worse by saying, you are a fucking cunt at work. That probably isn't the best thing. And like, if your Dom's just done something to you, or your sub's just said something like, well, you're a fucking twat, you're probably asking for more. So maybe we could say things in a different way. Somebody makes a mistake, somebody does something. Hey, I'm really struggling with that. The wraparound just caught my kidneys. Can we just take a minute, please? Don't need to say you're a fucking cunt. I've kind of said it in my own way. You just made a mistake. So it's how do we modify that? Oh, thank you. James Gross and emotional regulation. So there you go. There's some the next thing, the higher thing, the better thing. It's about dipping in and out of these things and being really aware that it really impacts our system. That's really important. And it's not always the best thing for us, because we then go for the experience and the intensity, and then we may actually develop regret. So we've got to be really careful about that. It is always slow down. How do you get from the point of recognizing when you're reacting due to feelings and be able to see it before it happens and change your behavior? That again goes back to physiology. What's happening in my body? If you do scans, so like with what Poppy's saying, that skills here, and then what I'm saying with this is, how do you get to that beforehand? So that's understanding the reactions that your body are telling you. So it's learning your body inside out instead of outside in. Understanding that, oh, I've got that feeling again, or oh, I need a pee. That I don't really need a pee. That's my anxiety playing up. So I don't feel very good about that. So it's always trying to understand the physical and physiological symptoms when they're happening, rather than reacting to them after they've happened. So that's getting in touch with your body. That's body scans. That's awareness of what I'm doing. Am I tightening my jaw? Am I pulling in? Have I got a dry throat? What's happening? And what am I feeling where my heart's starting to go? I'm having a bit of a hot flush. It's understanding the physiological symptoms. That can really, really help and make a difference. Would you say there's anything else, Poppy?
No, I think you're right. And I think also just putting a pin on it as well, being able to say, okay, I'm at the point of, so it's that early intervention. Sometimes we don't recognise things before, but we recognise just on the cusp of, if that makes sense, when you're riding that wave. And then it's about, okay, I'm going to put a pin in this, and then I'm going to really reflect, and I'm going to look, and I think you were saying about ultimately journaling and writing things down, and you end up then getting into a pattern of behaviour. If you don't get the cues, I don't even know if I'm hungry till I'm starving.
You've got the cues, you've just forgot how to read them. You've disassociated from them, and they're there, and they're there in all of us. And that's what we were saying earlier, and that's what Poppy was saying as well earlier. And that is that they're there. We know how to do these things. You have just learned to disassociate from them. So it's all about getting in touch with, well, how I feel really fucking angry and I'm fucked off and it's too late now. But let's have a look how that feels in my body. What's happening?
But that follow-on question, what you're asking there is to run before you can walk in some ways, with a place to run. Because ultimately, if you're saying I'm not able to preempt things, but then on the second hand it's I don't get the cues, the reality is you're not going to be able to preempt. You're going to have to allow yourself to cross that line and then walk it back and say, okay, this is what happened. What did that look like? What did that feel like? What were the early warning signs? But you're not going to recognise the early warning signs from the current position that you're in, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You have to accept that. You have to accept that I'm not going to be able to identify what this emotion is until I felt it. I might have had an extreme reaction. What am I going to do about that? How do I stop? How do I distract? How do I deploy all of these skills? I'm comfortable with my 5 skills that I'm really happy with. Okay, now I'm going to start walking it backwards. So this gets less and less, even if it's just frequency. The emotion still the same intensity, but the frequency of it's a little bit reduced. Brilliant. And then you start doing that work. Yeah. And then before you know it, you're at the stage where, oh, okay, I can preempt things. But it doesn't happen overnight. None of this happens overnight.
No, it takes fucking months and years for some of us. And it even goes down to I need a piss. How many times do you think, fuck me, I'm going to wet myself. This is ridiculous. I really need to go to the loo. So often. But actually, it's also about understanding. If you understand when you need a pee a little bit earlier, because you are in touch, that will help you get in touch with an emotion. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I really need this. If you can start to get in touch with other things, it allows for other connections to take place as well. That's really important for us to
recognize. The point I'll say is sometimes you can just change your behaviour.
Yeah.
I know we're doing all this work about emotions and behaviour and the interlocal relationship between the chain analysis that I really touched upon and all of that shit. But sometimes you can just say, do you know what? I don't like this behaviour. This behaviour is not serving me. I'm aware that there's probably a load of complex psychology going on behind it that I haven't got the money to do the therapy to work out right now. But this behaviour is not okay. I'm going to do the opposite. When I feel this, I'm not going to do this anymore.
And that's opposite to emotion. So that's another
workshop.
Yeah, and it's also another DBT skill. Doing the opposite to something is really important sometimes.
Microwave, yes.
So basically, check body scan almost constantly. No, just do it every time you pick your phone up. That'll do. Or do it every time you pick a drink up. Or do it every time you walk for a fucking door frame. That'll do. That's enough just to start. How am I? Like right now, if I contact, I really need a fucking piss. Like so, and so I'm in contact with my body. So that helps. All right. So thank you all very much for coming. We will see you in a couple of weeks if you want to come along again. Thank you very much for spending the time with us. We really appreciate it. We'll see you later.
Enjoy your piss.
Do it in a bottle and send it to someone and probably make more money. See you later.